He lost $70 billion in a single year. It was the largest personal financial loss in history, and instead of crawling into a hole, Masayoshi Son raised a $100 billion war chest and started placing even crazier bets. Because Masa isn't afraid of losing, he's afraid of being ordinary. In the year 2000, he handed a $20 million check to a Chinese English teacher with no business plan and no profit. All Masa saw was a spark in the guy's eyes. That spark turned into Alibaba, and that $20 million turned into $70 billion, one of the greatest startup bets of all time. But that win lit something even more dangerous inside of Masa. He started believing he could spot the future before it happened. So he did what no one else on earth could do. He raised $100 billion from Saudi oil money and launched the Vision Fund, the largest venture capital fund in history. Uber, DoorDash, ByteDance, Arm. The man made Silicon Valley his playground. Sometimes he picked winners, other times he lit money on fire, but every time he went all in. This is the story of a billionaire who doesn't invest, he gambles, who doesn't analyze, he feels, and who might be a genius or might just be insane. This is the rise, chaos, and madness of Masayoshi Son, the craziest billionaire ever. Chapter 1. A vending machine and a dream. Masayoshi Son wasn't born into power. He wasn't even born into privilege. He was born in Japan, to Korean immigrants, a group often treated like second-class citizens. His family name was originally Son Jong-wi, but in Japan, that name came with baggage. So like many Korean Japanese at the time, his family changed it to blend in. But Masa wasn't interested in blending in. He was obsessed with standing out. By 16, he already knew what he wanted: to get rich. So he flew to California with a dream and barely any English. While most kids his age were figuring out how to survive high school, Masa was obsessively reading about microchips and computers. He cornered professors at Berkeley, asking them which technologies would dominate the future. When they said semiconductors, he got to work. By 19, he had built a pocket translation device and sold it to Sharp for $1 million. Then, he launched a business importing arcade games from Japan, installing them in college dorms and pocketing the profit. But he wasn't done. Even then, Masa was playing a bigger game. He read biographies of business giants and began writing down goals for the next 50 years of his life. Yes, 50. And in those notes, he mapped out his path to becoming one of the richest men in the world. But being rich wasn't enough. He wanted to reshape entire industries. And to do that, he needed more than arcade games and pocket translators. He needed leverage, and that's when Masa created the company that would eventually become his empire, SoftBank. But back then, it was just a tiny distributor with a terrifying amount of debt. Chapter 2. The Alibaba Bet. In 1999, Masayoshi Son was flying high. SoftBank had invested in Yahoo, and his portfolio was packed with red-hot tech startups. His net worth ballooned. At one point, he became the richest man in the world for exactly 3 days. Then the dot-com bubble popped. And just like that, Masa lost an estimated $70 billion. It was the single largest personal financial loss in history. Most billionaires would have gone into hiding. Masa just booked a flight to China. He'd heard about a young entrepreneur named Jack Ma running an e-commerce startup out of a small apartment in Hangzhou. The company was called Alibaba. It had no real revenue, no hard assets, not even a proper business model, but Masa was intrigued. When he arrived, Jack greeted him in an office so modest it barely had furniture. No pitch deck, no financials, just a whiteboard and a story. Jack spoke passionately about how the internet would transform commerce in China. He talked about small businesses gaining power, about infrastructure, vision, and change. And Masa didn't care about any of it. All he focused on were Jack's eyes. He had shining eyes, Masa said later. That's how I decide. I invest in the eyes. So without due diligence, Masa wrote a check for $20 million. No board seats, no control rights. Just a bet on the man. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind. But 5 years later, Alibaba went public. And Masa's tiny bet had grown to over $70 billion. It was, and still is, one of the greatest venture investments of all time. But here's where things got dangerous. That one win didn't make Masa cautious. It made him invincible in his own mind. He started to believe he had supernatural instincts, that he didn't need data or traction, just a feeling. So he pulled out a notebook and sketched a plan to raise the biggest investment fund the world had ever seen. A fund not built to support companies, but to anoint kings. And that's when he created something the startup world had never seen before: the Vision Fund. Chapter 3: Vision Fund Mania, Buying the Future. The year was 2017. Silicon Valley had never seen anything like it. A Japanese billionaire, fresh off one of the greatest comeback stories in business, announced he was raising $100 billion to invest in startups. Not a typo. Not 10 billion. 100 billion. It was called the Vision Fund, and it instantly became the largest tech investment fund in history, more than all of the venture capital raised in the US that year combined. Where did the money come from? Mostly oil. Masa had met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and pitched him on the future of tech, AI, robotics, automation. He promised that the Vision Fund wouldn't just pick winners, it would create them. The pitch worked. The Saudis poured in $45 billion. Abu Dhabi followed. Apple chipped in. And soon, Masa had more firepower than any investor on earth. His strategy was simple: go big, go fast, go everywhere. While traditional VCs would invest tens of millions, Masa would write checks for hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, in a single round. Uber, Slack, DoorDash, Arm, ByteDance, Masa backed them all. The logic? If you gave a startup so much money that no one else could compete, that startup would have to win. It wasn't just betting on companies, it was a financial blitzkrieg. And it wasn't subtle. One founder said Masa came to the pitch meeting with a slide that read, "We will fund you more than anyone else. You will dominate." Masa didn't care about profit. He didn't care about burn rate. He didn't even care if the business model made sense. He only cared about one thing: growth. And if that meant setting money on fire to suffocate the competition, so be it. But this scorched earth approach came with a cost. Startups that took Vision Fund money grew fast, but not always smart. Founders got sloppy. Expectations ballooned. And suddenly, the startup world was full of companies with sky-high valuations and no clear path to profitability. Still, Masa kept going. He called it cluster bomb strategy. Invest in everyone, and the winner will emerge. But this strategy came with a flaw. When everyone has too much money, they stop being scrappy. And when growth slows, the pressure becomes unbearable. Masa thought he could bend the future to his will. But the Vision Fund wasn't just bending the rules, it was breaking them. And the cracks were about to show. Because the next company he backed wouldn't be another Alibaba. It would be a disaster so big, it nearly took SoftBank down with it. Chapter 4: Building the Future, 1 billion at a time. The Vision Fund was supposed to be Masayoshi Son's masterpiece. His chance to prove that traditional venture capital was too slow, too cautious, and too small-minded. So he did the opposite. He moved fast. He invested recklessly. And he thought bigger than anyone else alive. Ride-sharing. He backed Uber, Didi, Grab, and Ola. companies battling each other across continents. E-commerce, he gave $3 billion to Coupang. Robot pizza trucks, that was Zoomer, $375 million. Dog walking apps, sure, that was WAG, $300 million. To Masa, none of this was absurd. He was chasing momentum. And if a founder had the right energy, he didn't need a business model. And then came the one that would define him: WeWork. When Masa first met Adam Neumann, he didn't see a co-working company. He saw a messiah. Adam talked about elevating the world's consciousness, turning office spaces into spiritual hubs, and creating a new way of life. Most investors would have walked out of the meeting. Masa pulled out his iPad and drafted a $4.4 billion deal in the back seat of a car. Why? Because Adam had the sparkle, that same look Masa once saw in Jack Ma's eyes. But there was a difference. Jack Ma built a product people needed. Adam Neumann built a story people wanted to believe until the money ran out. Under SoftBank's pressure, WeWork went from a scrappy real estate startup to a hyper-growth unicorn. They expanded globally, bought schools, launched housing projects, even started a wave pool company. And they did it all without ever turning a profit. At its peak, WeWork was valued at $47 billion. Then it filed to go public. That's when the house of cards collapsed. The IPO paperwork revealed a financial disaster, massive losses, conflicts of interest, a CEO who trademarked We and charged his own company to use it. Investors fled. The IPO was pulled. The valuation imploded. Adam Neumann was forced out, with a golden parachute worth hundreds of millions. And the Vision Fund? It got burned, badly. SoftBank had to bail out WeWork just to keep it alive. Masa later called the investment foolish.
While you are increasing productivity and excitement at the same time, cost.
Admitting he'd let emotion take over logic. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about belief, and Masa's belief had blinded him. WeWork wasn't the only misfire, but it was the most public one. The one that made the world stop and ask, is Masa actually a genius or just lucky? And suddenly, the question wasn't about which startup would win next. It was whether SoftBank itself could survive the chaos it had created. Chapter 5. When the bill comes due. The WeWork disaster was supposed to be a fluke, a single bad bet in an otherwise brilliant portfolio. But it wasn't. It was a warning sign, one that Masayoshi Son ignored. And when it all came crashing down, the damage wasn't just reputational, it was financial carnage. In the quarters that followed WeWork's failed IPO, SoftBank's empire started to unravel. Startups that had once been overfed with Vision Fund cash began collapsing under their own weight. Zoomer shut down its pizza delivery ops. WAG, once hailed as the Uber for dog walking, imploded. Oyo, the Indian hotel chain that got billions from SoftBank, laid off thousands and shuttered operations globally. What looked like a global tech revolution suddenly felt like a bloated bubble, and it was popping. SoftBank posted a $17 billion loss in a single quarter. And that was just the start. Investors who once admired Masa's bravado began calling him careless. Founders whispered that Vision Fund money came with too much pressure and not enough sanity. The media dubbed the fallout the tech wreck and pinned it squarely on Masa's shoulders. Meanwhile, SoftBank's stock plummeted. The empire that had once reshaped venture capital was now gasping for air. Behind the scenes, panic was setting in. Masa had always been a high-wire act, but now the safety net was gone. And he had to do something he'd never done before: pull back. He halted new investments. He slashed valuations across his portfolio. And he publicly admitted, in front of a sea of reporters, "I was wrong. I got caught in my own hype. I made a lot of mistakes." It was the kind of humility no one expected, from a man who once said he'd invest until the last drop of blood left his body. But even as SoftBank bled cash and credibility, Masa wasn't finished. He started shifting the fund's focus away from consumer startups and toward infrastructure for the AI revolution. Data centers, chips, robotics. Tucked deep inside SoftBank's bruised portfolio is a crown jewel, Arm, the chip designer behind 99% of the world's smartphones. While the headlines scream WeWork and critics point to vision fund disasters, Masa sees something else. He sees a reset. To him, Arm isn't just a tech company, it's the foundation of the next great wave, the engine of the AI supercycle. If he can get one clean IPO window, one regulator to play ball, and just one more burst of market euphoria, he believes it could all flip. WeWork, forgotten. His empire, reinvented. And Masa, back on top, exactly where he believes he belongs. Chapter 6. Arm, AI and the 300-Year Plan. September 14th, 2023. Times Square blinks awake as Masayoshi Son steps onto the Nasdaq balcony. In his hand, the opening bell gavel. In his eyes, the weight of a decade. Below, the screen flashes 4 letters in electric blue. ARM. 7 years ago, he bought the British chip designer for $32 billion. Analysts called it sentimental, a relic, a billionaire playing with tech toys from the past. Now, Arm debuts at $54 billion, and SoftBank still owns 90% of it. In one move, his portfolio looks alive again. His critics, quiet. His narrative, rewritten, from WeWork punchline to Chip King. Later that night back in Tokyo, he's sketching arrows on a glass wall facing the bay. He's not talking about IPOS. He's talking about the future. Personal computers fed the internet, he says. The internet now feeds AI, and AI runs on chips. Not just any chips. Low power, always on, everywhere at once chips. Arm chips, smart glasses, delivery drones, robot farmers. The machines won't just move, they'll think. And to think, they'll all pay a toll to Arm. Software ate the world, he says. Now chips eat software. 7 months later, SoftBank drops $40 billion into OpenAI, the largest private raise ever. Pundits call it madness, a second bubble, another sun-sized gamble. Markets disagree. Arm rises 15% in a week. Inside SoftBank, things are colder, calmer. The red marker mantra, AI or die, still stretches across the mirrors. But now, zombie investments are getting chopped. Engineers are offered decade-long stock packages and pinned back to the glass, his original 300-year plan. Phase 1, personal computers, done. Phase 2, the internet, still standing. Phase 3, AI, in motion. At the bottom, one line, make life worth living for all humanity. Masa's story isn't linear. It whiplashes between fortune and disaster. He once lost $70 billion in a weekend, then turned a $20 million bet on Jack Ma into one of the biggest wins in tech history. He blew billions on WeWork, then quietly bought the company that could run the AI economy. The same impulse that lifts him, this hunger for impossible scale, is the one that nearly wrecks him, over and over again. To some, he's a gambler chasing ghosts. To others, a futurist too early for his own good. But really, he's both, visionary and wildcard, oracle and fire starter. If AI becomes the next electricity, Masa could be remembered like Rockefeller, a gatekeeper of the next age. If it stumbles, if it burns out or breaks down, he may go down as the man who bet everything and lost, twice. Either way, it will be pure Masa, audacious, chaotic, and always one leap ahead of logic.